How's your day going?
It's going well. Planning to go vote later on today.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes.
So we have early voting here at the MCC. I thought that it was going to be a lot of lines. I mean, eventually there will be, but it's been relatively calm here. So.
Okay. That's.
How far are you?
No, I'm not in Sugarland. Your office is in
Southeast.
I'm close by. I can't go till later today. I was planning to try one of the drive-through locations, but we'll see how it goes.
Okay. Again, if you're looking to go in and out, I mean, you can be in and out here in less than 10 minutes.
Okay, and you close at 7, right?
Yes, they close at 7. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, there is literally no lines, and we have a lot of machines up. So.
Okay, that's good. That's good to know. I'll see around what time I can make it, and so that's the plan, to do that.
Inshallah. Okay. So looks like it's 11. Let's start. Inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Hamza Reed, and I am the Director of Operations here at the Multicultural Center, and I'd like to welcome all of you to our Family First Center's weekly webinar. This happens every Wednesday at 11 a.m. The format usually consists of a short presentation followed by a question and answer session at the end, where we will field questions from the audience down in the chat box below, whether it is Zoom or on our Facebook Live. Today's topic is going to be signs to look for in domestic violence, and it will be presented by Sister Shahrzad Yekta. A little information about Sister Shahrzad. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist, behavioral health consultant, and coach with over 8 years of experience. Some of her areas of expertise include couples counseling, adolescent counseling, family counseling, trauma, crisis management, depression, and anxiety management. So without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Sister Shahrzad.
Touched so much. Good morning, everybody. Happy to be here again. And I know that last time I was here, we touched a little bit on domestic violence, but since October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, we decided to do a whole series on this. So I'm going to be talking about domestic violence again today, a little bit more in depth. So hopefully there will be some more useful information and just basic signs to look for with domestic violence, and hopefully that can be helpful to some of you, or if you know someone that could be, the information could be helpful for, that you could share it with them. So domestic violence and domestic abuse, really, sometimes we use the term domestic abuse because it can entail a lot that is not violent. When we think of violence, we think physical violence, but domestic abuse in general can be emotional, psychological, and physical, which would, entail the domestic violence part. But it's really any act of abuse and violence that is in an intimate relationship, that could be a marriage or not really. It could be any sort of relationship that entails the act of abuse and violence from one partner to the other. Unfortunately, within the United States, 1 in every 4 women and 1 in every 9 men experiences some sort of violence in their lifetime, and that is a very high statistics. I believe it's every 20 minutes, that there's some act of violence that's happening. So what is the purpose of, if I may say that, the purpose of domestic violence? And when we think about that, it's solely to control and to dominate the other person within the relationship. So when people feel that they want to dominate their partner or control their partner in many different ways. As I said, it could be psychologically, emotionally, and physically. They sometimes resort to violence, and it comes in many different forms. I want to kind of go through the cycle of domestic violence and what it looks like. There's different kinds of cycles that people, different ways that people talk about the cycle of violence, domestic violence, but I'm going to talk about one. They're very similar, but I'm going to talk about one. So it starts with the tension building. It's when you feel like you're walking on eggshells around your partner, when you feel fearful, when you feel intimidated by what you're going to say, by what you're going to do, by what you're going to everything in your relationship, you feel very fearful. So there's tension building. You feel like you could not say the right thing, or that any little thing that you might do or say can trigger violence. So there's tension building. And then all of a sudden something happens, either something is said, something is done, and out of nowhere you have the incidence of violence. So it could be verbal abuse, it could be emotional abuse, or it could be violence, that it gets physical between the partners. So the incident happens. And then right after the incident, you have the what's called the reconciliation. So that's when the shame and the guilt and the I'm sorry, happens. And there's typically a lot of blaming that happens during this period. Well, if you had not said this, I would not have become violent. If you had not done this, I would not have come to this place of feeling that I need to hit you. So there comes this, half apology, half blaming, and feeling guilt and shame for what's been done. And typically that's when the victim starts to feel like, okay, well, they're sorry for what they've done, and they start to kind of soften down. And then you go into this calm or what's called a honeymoon phase, where everything seems normal, and people think the partner or typically the victim feels like, okay, everything is normal and we're good. But then you go slowly but surely, it starts to go back into this tension building, to where you feel like, again, you're fearful, walking on eggshells, you can't say or do whatever it is that you want. So you go back into this cycle of tension building, the incident happens, you reconcile, and then you go into this calm period, and then it starts all over again. So is there a chance for us to break this cycle at some point, which we'll get to? But some of these things are, how do we know, when we talk about how do we know if we are in a domestic violence, partnership, domestic violence, intimate partner relationship or marriage? Am I still on? Oh yeah, okay. How do we know? How do we recognize the signs? So there is a lot that goes into that I would say, we are, sometimes we grow up in conditions, and we grow up in cultures specifically where we see certain behaviors, we grow up with certain behaviors even as a child, and we feel that those behaviors are a normal part of any relationship. And that is unfortunate when it involves domestic violence. For children who grow up, for example, in homes where domestic violence is a norm of a relationship, then you might grow up feeling like, well, that's how parents are supposed to interact. That's how a man and a woman is supposed to interact. And you learn that as a part of a norm. And sometimes those culture, when we talk about culture, is not just, where we grow up. Our culture can be our home environment. Our culture can be our school environment, our religion, our, the country that we come from or where we live. Culture can be defined in many different ways. So, when we think about what's normal in a relationship, culture can really influence that. And we have to, we have to think about that when we're thinking about what is acceptable within a relationship, and what are our ideas of what is acceptable within a relationship. A lot of times, you know, you hear people who are being abused or who are in domestic violence situation downplay what's happening to them by saying things like, well, it was just one time, or, well, you know, he apologized or she apologized later, you know, it didn't happen again. But these are things that typically you hear because people can get used to what is happening to them or justify it through, you know, their cultural norms, or sometimes it has to do with religious beliefs of, you know, I'm in a marriage and I cannot leave my marriage because it's, you know, it's frowned upon in my religion, and I have to stay and I have to make it work. A lot of times children are involved, and you know, people stay in that violent relationship for their children because they feel that they need to protect the children or to make it work. So there is the, you know, there is the emotional part, the psychological part. There's also the physical part. There's a lot of fear and guilt and intimidation and shame that is, you know, that is used by the abusers in those relationships. You know, fear of, because they have to keep, it's about control. The abusers want to, you know, have control over the victim. So things to look out for, things how they would want to, how they try to gain control of the person and their situation is by limiting their access to resources. What are our resources? Our resources are the friends and the family and the people around us. How do they limit that? You can't go out with this person. You can't see your family. Your family is always, you know, interfering with our relationship. So you can't talk to this person. You can't talk to that person. So limiting the human resources that we have, you know, within our friend circle and family circle. Another limitation is limiting your financial resources. That's also one of the a huge component of domestic violence. So you cannot work. You know, I don't want you to be working. If you work, you know, our money needs to come to me so that we know how our financials are being handled. I will only give you a certain amount of allowance for you know, this, and that's all you get. So limiting financial resources. And these are kind of the like more tangible things that happens and in when the abuser tries to keep you under control. And then there's also the psychological part that has to do with self-esteem. You can't do this. You're not capable of. You're nothing without me. You know, if I say something, it has to be done. It has to be done the way I say it. And there is also, it can be a lot of threats. You know, typically threats against someone's life are things that makes people afraid, and that is a safety issue. So the threats can be, you know, for themselves or for the victim. So saying things like, "I will kill myself if you leave." You know, for example, if you leave me, I will kill myself, or I will kill you. If you leave this relationship. So these kinds of threats, which threatens your safety, your life, can keep people rightfully. It scares people to staying in those relationships. I think on average, every woman leaves 7 times before. You know, leave 7 times and come back to the relationship before they leave for good and are able to just put the relationship behind them. So, you know, as it relates to self-esteem, another thing is these questions that comes to the victim's mind, things like, you know, am I crazy? Things like blaming yourself, like I shouldn't have said this. The reason this violence, this incident happened is because I said this or I did this. So blaming yourself, I provoked it, thinking that I deserved it. Even these are thoughts that typically comes to mind when you are a victim of abuse. You know, you're trying to feel humiliated, and you're trying to you know, justify what has happened, and you blame yourself. And a lot of times also the abuser blames you. If you had, like I said, if you had not said this, you know, this wouldn't have happened. If you had not done this, this wouldn't have happened. So one thing to remember when it comes to domestic violence and remember that the behavior is a choice. There is no justification for the violent behavior whatsoever. It is a choice that the abuser makes to take control of the other person in a violent way, and something that oftentimes they're able to control when they want to. For example, a lot of abusers are able to control their behavior when they're in public. You've probably, if you know of these kinds of cases, you know that a lot of abusers are actually, have a charming personality in public. And that's why it can be very surprising to a lot of people to hear about their abusive behavior in private. So they can be charmers, they can turn it off when they need to. A lot of times they turn off the abuse to actually take more control of the situation. So that can be in the cycle of when they're trying to reconcile with you. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. If you had not done this, I wouldn't have, acted this way. So they are in control of their behavior and they choose not to. So it's a choice, and it is a behavioral issue. And unfortunately, as much as we like to understand and believe that people change, and people do change, this is one of those issues that we need to let the victims of domestic violence know that it is not on them to help their abusers get to a better place or to heal from whatever it is that they're suffering from. It is not on them. You, the person who is being abused, are not in a place to help your abuser be healed and to be able to change them. People change when they want to. People change when they decide they want to change. And it is not your job to help them. Because sometimes, we hear from victims that, through loving them, I'm going to be able to change them to not abuse me anymore. And that is unfortunately a false belief, and which does not happen. Sooner or later, they will realize that it's not going to happen. However, through therapy, through healing work with your loved ones, speaking up to people that you feel safe with, these are things that victims can do to help themselves heal, because it is an injuring trauma that you experience when you are in a domestic violence relationship, and you are able to heal yourself, and that is the best thing that you can do. However, when it comes to the abuser, that is something that takes a lot of work, but they have to do it on their own. They have to be able to accept the responsibility for the behavior that they're displaying. And it takes a long time. It's not something that, somebody can go to, let's say, 5 sessions of therapy and they come back to you, or even couples counseling. Couples counseling is actually not recommended for people who are in domestic violence relationships. Couples counseling it won't work when there is violence and there's abuse currently happening in a relationship. People have to, the victim and the abuser need to work on that separately, and the abuser needs to work on accepting the behavior that they're doing, accepting responsibility for the behavior that they're displaying, and then the victim needs to work on healing themselves, because they need to also be able to accept that they deserve love, that they deserve happiness, and they deserve to feel all of those things without the threat of something could go wrong, without feeling like they're walking on eggshells. So I bring that up because it's a common common thought, a common belief that unfortunately, comes to you when you are in that kind of situation. Because sometimes when it's an intimate partner, there is some sort of love involved. There is sometimes you've been in the relationship for a long time, or it may be a new relationship, but you start to kind of your self-talk and your patterns of thought start to bring you down, especially as you're going through maybe that reconciliation period or the honeymoon period. So you start to justify the things that have happened, and there is nothing that really justifies a violent behavior towards another human being. So you have to remind yourself of that you deserve to feel peace, you deserve to feel loved without the threat of any kind against your life or against your well-being, emotional, psychological well-being, and of course, your physical well-being. So that's a lot of what I had for today. I have put in a lot of resources for different hotlines that help with domestic violence situations, hotlines that you can call and talk to somebody who is trained to really talk with you. A lot of times we don't feel safe talking to our family members, to our friends, because either there is a threat against the victim, that if you say anything about what's happening to your family or your friends, then I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. So there's a threat. So victims feel silenced. Or there is shame and guilt and embarrassment, that you don't want to, you feel ashamed, you feel embarrassed to talk about it to your family or to your friends. When it comes to men, especially, male victims tend to talk a lot less and report a lot less because of the shame and the guilt and the embarrassment. Domestic violence can happen in same-sex couples or male and female heterosexual couples. So it really happens in any relationship. It can happen in family relationship, any kind of close relationship. And then sometimes there is children involved. So when children are involved, it's also important. And I believe that that's the topic next week that we're gonna, my colleagues are gonna touch on more. But when children are involved, that also complicates it a lot more, because as I said, sometimes victims feel like they have to stay in the relationship because of their children, but then how much harm is done to the children who stay in that environment of violence is also something to be thinking about. So I put the resources there, numbers that you can call and talk to someone. There's also an app, a phone app. I believe it works on iPhone and Android. There's a lot of them out there, and these are applications that look like regular news applications, but they have a resource. They have like a sort of like a hidden place where there's resources, because unfortunately a lot of victims, their phones are under control by the abuser, so they're not able to freely have whatever it is they want on there. So this kind of looks like it looks like a news app, regular news app. So, but it has resources. And then also, something that if there's anybody listening to us that has, a practice or a business of some sort where you have people coming in that you feel might be in domestic violence relationships, and you want to help them, someplace that is, you want to be able to reach out to them. I forgot to say this. It's very important for us to feel comfortable reaching out, because a lot of times victims are not going to reach out for help themselves. So when we are able to, if we see something and we speak up, then it's important for us to, to do that, but safely. As I mentioned last time, there is no manual or a step 1, 2, 3 that I can give to tell you do this, this, and this if you encounter someone who is someone who you feel might be in a domestic violence relationship, because we always have to assess safety first. Sometimes victims might be accompanied in whatever setting that you're encountering them. They might be accompanied with the abuser, and that would not be a safe place to reach to them. You want to make sure you talk to them in a place where it's safe and they're by themselves, so that they feel safe to talk to you if they want to. So something that I recommend a lot of practices to do is you can always put out resources in women's restrooms. That's always a safe place, because women go by themselves, and if they need to, they can always grab the resources. Sometimes I recommend making like flyers, and then something that they can like rip apart and just grab if they need to. So if you have a business or you are in a place where you feel like that could be helpful, that is a great resource to put out for for people to have. And depending again on where you encounter this, I want to reiterate this, that it's always important to assess safety of who you think is the victim. So making sure that you have the person in a safe place before you offer them help. And offering them help is not always, unfortunately, it's not always giving them a way out. Sometimes offering them help is just listening to them without judgment, without blame, because they feel already probably blamed for a lot of what is happening. So listening to them, judgment-free, and offering them resources for when they are ready, because a lot of times they're not ready to leave the relationship for many different reasons, as I said, financial freedom, or psychologically, or just in general. So offering them the help and then being open to follow up with them, those are important steps, and always making sure that the safety comes first. So the resources are all in the chat box, and I'm hoping that the resources will also be in the chat box for Facebook, so that people can access. And that's all I had. I'm not sure if there are any questions in the chat box. I don't see any.
Alhamdulillah. Jazakallah khair, Sister Shahrzad. That was very informative. I have questions for you, but first, I just want to let everyone know we're going to start the question and answer session of our webinar. And if you have any questions for Sister Shahrzad, please put them in the chat box below, whether it's Zoom or Facebook. But I will start. Sister Shahrzad, you talk about not being shy to reach out to someone when you are experiencing domestic violence. So I wanted to talk about specifically the Islamic community. There is a stigma in the Islamic community concerning domestic violence, whether speaking out and letting everyone know. It's kind of like, whatever happens in the house stays in the house kind of thing. So if a spouse is experiencing domestic violence, but is shy to get help, what should they do specifically for the Islamic communities?
As I mentioned earlier, I'm glad you brought this up. That would be the part of the cultural part that I was talking about, that in our cultures, which religion is is considered a part of our culture. And, a lot of times there is that shame. There is that belief of, I have to keep everything together in my family. Like, this is not okay for me. And then there is the shame, there is the guilt of, I guess I could call it the religious guilt. And then there's the family guilt. So you might feel shy and not wanting to reach out. I would say in those situations, you have to find a safe person. That safe person could be anyone that you feel that will not be judging you for what it is that you're about to tell them. So when it comes to, some cultures, I would say feel more comfortable talking to people like themselves from the same culture. However, there are some cultures, when it comes to certain topics, they feel more comfortable and open talking to someone from a different culture and totally out of their community, out of the people that are they're in immediate touch with. So I would say for those people, for those who don't feel comfortable talking to people from the same culture about these types of issues that I would say they're considered taboo, in cultures to talk about them. So when there is a taboo topic and you don't feel comfortable talking to people from your own culture, these hotlines that I put are a great resource to call and talk to someone to get more information, or just to talk to somebody, because they are anonymous. they are confidential, and there are trained people on the other side of the line to help you. So you don't have to give out your name if you don't feel comfortable. You don't have to give out your information. Sometimes they ask for your, let's say, zip code, and that's for their, because of data. They're trying to collect data to see who's calling them. But you don't have to give any information about you if you don't feel comfortable. So if that is the case, I would say reach out to the hotlines. They are a great resource. They have excellent people on the phones who can help you. However, if you're not one of those people, if you actually are the type of person that feels like you want to talk to somebody who understands you, find the safe person. 9 out of 10 times, I would say, if you look around you in your friend circles, in your family circles, there is that one person that you can trust with what it is. There is that one person that you feel like would be open to hearing you in your family, or maybe in your friend circle. Friend circle would be like a little bit removed from your family circle, so that sometimes that may be an easier way to go about it. Maybe it's someone in your religious community that you feel like they have expressed openness to this. For example, like we are sitting right here, right now, talking about this issue. So you very well know that if Multicultural Center has brought someone to talk about this, then the people who are trying to help are open to hearing about it and also offering you help. So reach out to them, because if they were not okay about it, they would not bring somebody like me, and they would not dedicate a whole month to talking about topics related to domestic violence. The help is out there, but you have to find the way that you feel comfortable and also safe to share. Sometimes people feel that's actually something that happens a lot. People feel safe talking about the issues that they have with their doctor when they go to see their primary physician. Unfortunately, as I talked last month, with the pandemic happening, there is a lot less doctor's visits happening. There is a lot less reporting of domestic violence happening, because people don't have the opportunity. They're staying at home. They don't have the opportunity to go out and talk to those people that they typically would talk with. But even at your doctor's office is a safe place, a safe person where your records and everything is going to stay confidential. So that's a great place also to talk to somebody and mention and see what they offer you. So find the person, whoever it may be, that you feel safe with and that you feel like you can start the journey. It will take a while. It's not that one person that you talk to is going to be able to fix all of it for you. It's going to take a while, but at least it's a starting place where you feel like, you might feel like you're alone. Nobody gets it. Like everything on the outside might look perfect, but then you're being, you're suffering from the inside, and you feel like nobody understands, or that you're alone. So that at least will get you started in taking off a little bit of that burden off of you.
So I'd like to talk about that, finding a safe person and the responsibility of knowing. What would you say to someone who either has been told about domestic violence issues from someone of their loved ones or their friends, or has experienced domestic violence issues with their loved ones or their friends? What should they do with this information?
You mean if someone comes to you with their domestic violence issue and you have experienced it yourself?
Well, two different ones. One, someone who is voluntarily giving information about what happened and things like that. What should you do about that situation? Or some situations where no one has come up to you, but you've being in their company, you've experienced domestic violence issues with them, and you have that. Now, what can you do with this knowing? Like what should you do? Should you contact someone, or should you not?
Okay, let me answer the first part and then I'll clarify the second part, because I got a little confused. Okay. So if someone comes to you, correct me if I'm wrong, because I think the first part of your question was, if someone comes to you and discloses to you that they are in a domestic violence situation, what should you do?
That's correct.
Okay. So first and foremost, one of the first reactions that, I would say I've heard this from professionals, therapists like myself, and in between anybody else, is that the first gut reaction is, why don't you leave? Why are you staying in that relationship? And I would say that unfortunately we know better, and we know that that is not possible for a lot of people. So if that voice comes to your head, and you want to tell the person, why aren't you leaving? Why are you staying in that relationship? Try to quiet that voice down, and just listen for a little while to what the person is actually saying. If they actually ask you for help and ask you for something specific, like, do you know a place that I can go to? Like, if this is something that's actively happening and I don't know what to do, do you know what I can do? There's all the resources that I gave you that you can give them, and you can also help them get through, to them, to these resources, or however way that you're able to utilize these resources. However, I would also ask them, if they don't come out and specifically ask them, come out to you and specifically ask you for help and tell you to do something for them, I would tell you that to listen to them and to not be afraid to ask them, is there something that you think that I could do? Is there something that you want to do, but you feel like you don't have the power to do, that maybe I could help direct you to resources, or that I could help you with? Financial freedom is one of the biggest things that people don't, if they don't have the financial means, that they're not going to be able to leave the situation. So they might feel that's a burden, or that's a barrier to them being able to leave this place. So how could I help with that? Are you able to are you able to offer them steps to what they can do to get themselves out of the situations? It also depends, I would say, if you're the first person they're coming to and this is the first time they're really openly talking about it, that's a big deal. And I would say in that first time that you're hearing all this, you can even ask them, is this the first time you're telling somebody about this? If it is the first time, then you need to give them time. You need to give them time to really talk to you about it, really talk about what has been happening to them. Validating their experience is one of the biggest things that you can do for a victim. And if you cannot validate their experience, if you find yourself even thinking about, well, maybe you should have, or maybe you could have, then either try to quiet that voice and keep it inside of you, or refer them to somebody else, one of these resources, or just be able to actually be honest and open with them that, hey, I don't think I'm the best person to help you with this case, but can I offer you these other resources? Because what you don't want to do is, invalidate their experience and then make them feel worse or make them feel blamed for what has happened to them. So that was the first part of the question.
No, you answered both of them.
Did I answer both of them? Okay.
Yes, you answered both of them. So that's good.
Okay.
Because you said if you haven't been approached to do anything, then you either you don't do anything, or you ask them, hey, should I, are you in need of any help or anything like that? Should, what resources you need and things like that. So you answered both questions.
Yes, and I want to emphasize this part. Don't be afraid. If you feel that someone is in a domestic violence situation, don't be afraid to ask them. Ask them. However, you have to assess the situation before you ask them. For example, I'll give an example. I'm not sure. There might be. I've noticed in the past talks that there's been healthcare professionals listening to us. So I'll mention this because I've also had the experience with this. You have a couple that comes to your healthcare practice, a doctor's office, or any other kind of healthcare practice, not a mental health, because a mental health professional would kind of know how to deal with it, but any other kind of healthcare setting. They come to you and you notice that one of the partners is a lot more quiet. They're not talking about their healthcare. They're not answering the question, and the other one is answering all the questions, making all the decisions. They're not even letting the other person speak. The body language, you see the body language of the person just making themselves small, not wanting to really grab any attention. this is one of those tricky places, because a lot of times if the patient, if the person, the client, agrees that their partner can be in the room with them, it's really tricky because you can't really kick them out. However, if you are a healthcare professional, there are ways, like there are things that you might, you could say to have the person by themselves so that you can safely ask this question. We have had cases where everything exploded because, the question was asked directly in front of the person, in front of the partner, the abuser, and you don't want that to happen, because that actually puts the other person at risk when they go home. It could be that trigger that actually triggers the violent behavior to happen. So you want to make sure that the person is in a safe environment and you're able to safely ask them, but don't be afraid to ask them. If it is your family member, in fact, where you see it was somebody or friend that you were in touch with every week, or every month, and now you've lost touch with them and you've noticed other behavioral changes with them as well, and you suspect, if you know, and sometimes you don't know. Right now, especially right now, it would be hard because everyone is dealing with some sort of problem. But if you have this gut instinct in you, I would say it doesn't hurt to safely ask, and you can always find respectful ways to ask it, depending on how comfortable you are with the person. If you are in a healthcare setting, you might be able to ask them directly, are you experiencing any sort of abuse at home, or are you experiencing any sort of violence at home, or anything that is hurting you, making you feel have a lower self-esteem, or experiencing depression. A lot of times with depression and anxiety is what depression and anxiety is what you see in the person, and then the cause of it is the domestic violence that's happening. So don't be afraid to ask, but always make sure that you assess the situation for the safety of the person that you're about to ask. You don't want this to be the incident that's going to cause more violence.
Is there any way to tell that someone will be abusive in a relationship when looking for a partner?
Okay, what would be, you would see a lot of control is the best, because the essence of domestic violence and abuse is trying to gain control, as I mentioned earlier. So when you get in a relationship and you have a person in front of you who is trying to control every aspect of your life, it doesn't start very big. Typically it starts very small. I would say it starts in the calm and honeymoon phase a lot of times. And then slowly you have these red flags that typically people dismiss, like, are you really going to wear that, going out? Or, why are you in touch with this person anyway? Or, how much do you make? And do you really need to spend money on this thing? Sometimes it's tricky in a relationship, especially one that maybe you've been in for a long time, because, where is the cutoff line, you would say, for control? Where is the cutoff line where it's just my partner giving their opinion, as opposed to it's my partner, really enforcing and just, I have no choice but to go with whatever it is that they say. Can I have a good question to ask yourself is, can I have a dialogue about this thing that my partner is presenting that I don't like? Or do I feel fearful about having this dialogue? Do I feel like there are topics that I am not able to bring up in my relationship, and I'm not able to safely bring them up and talk about them in this relationship? Those are red flags that you should not be ignoring. When you feel fearful of bringing up certain topics, of doing certain things, or saying some things in a relationship, then that should be a red flag for yourself, that it's not, that's basically, where it's not safe for you to do something, to say something, and that is not, that's where unhealthy relationships start to form. That is unhealthy. If you're not able to say something to your partner safely, then you're feeling fearful, you're feeling like you're walking on eggshells, you're not able, no, I can't bring up this topic, then that is the start of an unhealthy relationship. So yes, absolutely. But you cannot rely on the other person to bring these things up for you. They will not. You have to rely on yourself to recognize these signs that, this is where it's going wrong. Sometimes, we, these acts of possessiveness or control, or a lot of times you would call it, I guess, as jealousy. It shows up as jealousy, like, I don't want you to talk to this person, or do this or do that. These acts of jealousy can be interpreted as, oh, this person really cares about me. But I would say, again, draw the line somewhere and ask yourself, if it's making you feel uncomfortable, then that is where, as you start to feel uncomfortable with it, is a good sign. Is a good sign for you to check in with it. Why did I feel uncomfortable with this? Is this really okay with me? And make sure that you do not justify things for you that you're not okay with. And again, the fear and the intimidation is a good check-in point with yourself as well. Am I fearful to bring something up? Or am I fearful to even talk back in this situation and defend myself and say, no, for example, I'm just giving an example, like, no, I love my brother. I have to call, I've been calling them for years and years. I feel comfortable with my brother, and I have to be able to talk to them every week. So no, I'm not going to not call them all of a sudden because you don't like a certain thing. Or do you feel like, no, I cannot say this because that is going to trigger something. That I'm trying to think, there is one more thing I think. And also sometimes this one is harder. So you have to really be in tune and observant of the person. But sometimes you might see little things, little ways of how people treat others, that you will see those red flags in how they treat others too. Typically though, you will not see this with strangers. As I've said, abusers can be great charmers on the outside to strangers. You will not know. You will not know. I have seen this case after case after case where an abuser's outside persona is perfection to a lot of ways. It's what will draw so many people to themselves. Like it's unbelievable. And then I had I was working with these victims and I heard the stories, and it's just, if someone heard those stories, you would not believe them. You would not believe, but when you see those, when you put these two things together, then you realize, oh, there's so much that's going on behind. So when you're watching and observing the person, observe them with people that are close to them. So those behaviors, those abusive behaviors typically happen to people that are, most of the time, they happen to people that they are close to, that they are, in some way, one way or another intimate with. Intimate meaning, close family relationships, close friendships. You would see that in those. You probably won't see it with strangers, but that's another thing. But you have to be observant. But if you get this sense in you, this uneasy feeling inside of you that says, that didn't sit well with me, listen to that voice. Don't ignore it. Listen to that voice.
Jazakallah khair for that. Last question.
Mm-hmm.
How do you know when to leave your abusive partner?
Okay, so
I'm sorry.
As a tricky question. How do you know when to leave? I guess how I'm going to answer that is, it's never okay. It is absolutely never okay for violence to be happening in a relationship that is supposed to be loving, where there's supposed to be trust, where there's supposed to be unconditional care and love. Violence has no place, absolutely no place in a loving relationship. There is no ifs and buts and ors and there is nothing. It's just a full stop sentence. Violence does not have a place in a loving relationship. But the question of when is the right time to leave, I would say it has to be answered by every person, you know, differently, depending on their situation. Unfortunately, you would hope that everyone who is in these domestic violence relationships feels empowered and has the resources to leave immediately. But unfortunately, we know that that is not the case. When you leave is really going to be your choice. And unfortunately, there is consequences with staying in a relationship like that. However, we also have to be understanding of the circumstances of people who are in domestic violence relationships. So we have to be mindful that not everyone is able to leave. And when they feel empowered to leave, if we are in a support role, we have to be there to make sure that we give them whatever it is that they need to leave. So again, it's a tricky question. I can't give an answer because again, everyone's situation is different. But the only thing that I will say again and again is that violence does not have a place in a loving, in a relationship that is supposed to be loving, and there's supposed to be unconditional care. And if there is, then that relationship is not healthy. And also, my point from before that it is not your job as the victim of domestic violence, and you are also not able to, even if you wanted to heal your abuser or to help them get through whatever it is they're experiencing, whatever the reason behind it might be. It is not your job, not your place, and you don't have the magical ability to make it go away for them. And I think that more people need to hear that, because when we are in relationships that you know we've been in maybe for a long time, and there is love, there's been some love, or we feel that there is some love, it might come across as I have a role, I have to fix this, you know, I will be the one that will fix it. And that unfortunately doesn't happen. So take care of yourself in whatever way that is needed, and do what you need to do to empower yourself to a place where when you no longer feel that you are fearful of what is to come. Sometimes when you get to that point where you feel like there is nothing else for me to lose, there is nothing else to lose, you know, anything that happens from this point forward is better than what I'm in currently, is that point where you decide I'm going to leave, you know, I'm going to end this relationship. But when that point arrives, is really dependent on many things, many factors, unfortunately. But there is help out there. So this would be the hopeful part. There is help out there. There's resources out there. It is a long process. It takes a while, but you can absolutely heal from your traumatic relationship that involves violence, and you do not deserve to be in a relationship that is violent.
Jazakallah khair. I'd like to sincerely thank Sister Shahrzad for her important and impactful presentation. I hope all of you guys took something away from that. Thank you all for tuning in to our Family First Center weekly webinar. Be sure to meet us here each week, where we'll be discussing a different topic every Wednesday at 11 a.m. But as Sister Shahrzad said, this month, all month long, we will be dealing with domestic violence. So, Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.